For the first 17, 18 months, the state bill really didn't matter. It was great that Florida was one of the first movers. In fact, NIL was going to start 2023. Chip Lamarcket and company, by moving their bill up, got NIL to start July of 2021. But we really didn't have a lot of legislation from the NCAA. Schools were trying to anticipate what they could and couldn't do, so I didn't really care about the state bills. About 4 months ago, though, the NCAA came in and gave us further clarification on what schools could and couldn't do in regards to helping athletes get deals. They basically created a separation of church and state, which was schools could not broker deals for athletes. They couldn't negotiate deals. But what they could do was promote booster clubs, booster collectives, other organizations that were doing the right thing to help athletes get deals. Unfortunately, in the state bill, there was this clause that said schools could not cause compensation. Now, that's a very vague statement, but a lot of the schools were afraid that by connecting athletes with boosters, by connecting athletes with brands, you were causing compensation. So that actually put the state of Florida and Florida schools behind the 8 ball. Florida State was unable to come out and support Rising Spear, although they jumped the gun and did do it a little early because they knew where the bill was going. They couldn't promote Battles End, where we saw other schools in other states really getting involved with their collectives and promoting. So what this bill really does, and I'm a big believer that now we have what we need from the NCAA. We don't need state bills, but we are now on par as a state with the NCAA. I mean, who would have thought our state would have been more restricted than the NCAA? But it happened, and now we're in a position where we can compete with everyone. I had mentioned earlier, Florida State has done a really good job with a slow and steady approach, which ended up working, whether that was on accident or on purpose. And I think we're in a really good spot.
You made the comment, you actually posting on the Warchant message boards. I think you made a comment, or it might have been on Twitter. People can follow you on Twitter as well at NILP. But you made a comment about this. The schools still can't be organizing deals, right? Like Mike Norvell can't be setting up marketing deals, but there is a little bit more leeway than there was previously, right?
Yes. Listen, whether it's I don't care what state you're in, a coach, a school cannot go and negotiate the deal and broker the deal. And if you think about it from a liability standpoint, it makes total sense, right? Let's use a non-Florida State example, right? Because I don't want to talk about a possible negative situation for Florida State guys. Let's go down to Gainesville. And let's say the University of Florida helped broker a car deal for Anthony Richardson. And Anthony Richardson gets in a car, has a few drinks, and kills someone. I mean, there's huge liability. There's a lot of reasons you can't do that. So, yeah, schools can't do that. They can do all of the financial literacy. They can educate their student athletes. They can now connect them. But the schools can't be a part of the brokering the deals and negotiating the contract. And that's probably the right thing. If you think Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia have an advantage now, let them go broker deals for kids.
I made the comparison. I was talking to somebody about, if you look at the NFL model or really any pro sports, the coaches coach the players. The front office is more involved with the financials. Yeah. And so like if a financial situation is not exactly what a player wants, their issue is with the front office. I feel like that's kind of where this is going here in college sports, to where, if a player's not happy with their deal, they don't necessarily have to get mad at their position coach or whatever deals that they're able to get in the open market. That's between them and their agents, their representatives, and or different NIL organizations. So that kind of gives a little separation, I think, from the coaching staff from that standpoint too, I think, right?
Absolutely. Another great example of that is logo use, right? We see it all the time in the NFL. If you want to use a logo, you got to be a corporate sponsor. I can't go have Saquon Barkley support my business and use the Giants logo or the NFL logo. I've got to go through the NFL. We're starting to see that in college as well. These athletes have plenty of name recognition and brand recognition on their own. It's really interesting that you bring that up, Ira. We talked about on our first, we'll call it YouTube video, that I saw the future of NIL being not necessarily with collectives, but with actual booster clubs, right? Mm-hmm. Booster clubs have the structure, the boards, the employees to run a legitimate business. They're risk averse. They're never going to put the university in a bad position. And it's their job to carry out advancement and development, which is NIL. And it just so happens we get an announcement from Texas A&M and the 12th Man Fund. And I don't want to call myself NIL Nostradamus, but I'm about to change the Twitter name, right? Because that was exactly what we called. It's happening. This space is going to take another 3 years to figure out, but we're starting to see what this could look like if you're willing to play, within the rules, but get creative. Because I promise you, enforcement cavalry is coming.
Yeah, Peter, I've got a question for you real quick. There's something that the CEO of On3, Shannon Terry, the parent company at Warchant.com, is on the network of On3. He mentioned something about market value and how things are shrinking down. Like there was almost not quite a bubble effect, but an exaggeration of the metronome of what a player and what a roster, specifically in football, is going to cost in NIL terms. And, we all saw the story about Rashada, and we all laughed at it too, about 13 million. I mean, that's crazy for one 4-star quarterback, but that the idea that a roster could have been worth 20 million, like was rumored by Sliced Bread, right? And Jimbo's favorite guy on the internet for Texas A&M, that is now a market that's correcting itself. Do you foresee that that's something that's happening in the NIL game, speaking generally, of course, that now that everybody's out there and all states seem to be kind of getting on the same playing field, that kind of market force is starting to dictate what a player is worth, and it's regulating itself a little bit more?
Yeah, and I really think there's two reasons for that. One, I think you're seeing schools and coaching staffs recognize we got to be careful with, and again, we're going to talk about this in the legal sense, right? We got to be careful with how deep we want to go into the recruiting world, right? How much do we want to talk about recruiting and NIL and the quote unquote bag dropping? Because how can that impact your culture, right? We saw a lot of teams that were rumored to have gotten out into the recruiting world with NIL heavy, and they did not have good years. So I think you're seeing schools focus more on retention, more on equity and equality based, merit based, and it's working. And then also, I think the bigger thing is return on your investment. We have a lot of people that, donate to these collectives, to these booster funds. And, they're investors in the real world. They own businesses. I don't think everyone realizes, unless like you're really involved, wow, if in my class, and if I have a top 5 class, if I hit on it 50% of my kids, that's a big time hit rate. The ROI is low. So when you realize that the recruiting game is difficult and kids were asking for astronomical numbers, and you realize the safer bet is more equity and retention based within your own locker room, I think both of those two factors really indicate a shrinking market, but a more realistic market. Some of those numbers we heard, they were ridiculous. And by the way, a lot of those numbers weren't real. I think that was another part of what Shannon was talking about. Agents were leaking numbers that weren't real to try to drive up the market. Now that we're starting to learn a little bit more about the data, we can be a little bit more realistic, and we can have a normal space of what this is and really talk about what are you actually worth, not how can I get you to come to my school by any means necessary.
And the last thing I wanted to ask you about, Peter, and we'll let you get going. I know you got other things going on, but it seems like we're seeing some other changes in terms of like these collectives on different campuses. Some schools collectives are going away. Some schools collectives are emerging with the blessing of the university. I think it's Southern Cal, and like you said, Texas A&M now it's part of the boosters. And you're seeing some schools where basically the school is aligning with one collective and the other collective is getting frozen out. Is that because of that ruling a few months ago? And then also, is there going to be a lot more of that shaking out, do you think, across the country?
So I think you're going to see a lot more of that shaking out. One of the phrases we use at Athliance is confusion leads to inaction. If you have 4 or 5 collectives, I don't know where to go, what to do, who to give to, and I'm just not going to get involved. I'm a big believer that from a collective standpoint, you should have no more than 2, and they both have to have different functions, right? Let's talk about Florida State. You have Rising Spear and Battle's End. Battle's End seems to be totally focused on football, right? There's less university involvement in Battle's End from a promotional standpoint, because the more you're involved as a university, the more Title IX implications attach, which means you have to be, have more, equity when it comes to your men's sports and your women's sports. But by having Battle's End focus on football, it frees up Rising Spear to focus more on all the other sports and get Title IX compliant and make sure all of our athletes are doing a good job. You see a lot of schools have 2 collectives where one's a 501c3, almost works as a charity, and the other one's for profit. I think as long as you have those 2 type of setups, you're fine. When you start getting into the 3, the 4, everyone's competing. That's not what this is about. We talk with collectives all the time. This isn't an ego thing. That's why booster clubs are perfect for this. There's no ego. It's all about advancement of the athletic department, right? Development of the athletes. We as supporters need to support. I should not be turning into a general manager and an owner. So now that the NCAA came out and said schools can promote collectives and booster clubs, that means they can disassociate as well. Don't give to that collective, that booster club, if they're not doing the right thing. So I think you're seeing schools start to take a little bit more control, pick the quote unquote winner, and also consolidate the space so there's unified efforts, not just within the department, but also externally with boosters and other people that can donate to the funds.
That's good stuff there. And you saw at Florida State, there was somebody obviously in our chat that saw as well the Battle's End tweeted out, for example, in the Tallahassee, the Florida State market, that Mike Norvell had a brief message. That's going to be the centerpiece, I believe, of a website that's launching for the Battle's End in the near future. So we'll cover that at warchant.com and WarchantTV. But when these needs arise, and they will more and more in this age of college football, where we got to read through contract language or legislation, that's what Peter Schoenthal is here for. Peter, really, really appreciate the time tonight. And again, man, keep on cranking out some of the good vintage gear as you make appearances on WarchantTV. People will be very happy about it.
Oh, I almost want to come on more because I got gear to share. So you let me know and I'll come on. I just got to call the dry cleaner. We'll be fine.